Okay, let's go on to point number 5, because, in a way, that's probably the most important one of this whole meeting, and that is the awards program. And the first one is for the Young Scholar Award. I'm trying to be a little bit humble, so I don't call it the Joseph Donnermeyer Award. And for that, we have an excellent, and I'm going to go over and consult my other computers so that I can do this correctly. We have an excellent winner, Orlando Goodall, who wrote an article for the British Journal of Criminology, which you can, if you argue it isn't number 1, then it's probably number 2 in the world. He titled it "The Reality of Rural Crime, the Unintended Consequences of Rural Policy, and the Co-Production of Badger Persecution and the Illegal Taking of Deer." And what I like, Orlando, about your title and about your article in particular is that previously we've had articles in the Rural Journal about the game of cat and mouse played by game wardens, if we can call them that, and those who are poachers. And it's quite a sociological phenomena from my point of view as to how they use rationalizations and how they use various strategies to either catch the poacher or for the poacher to slip away. So with that, what I'm going to ask you to do, if you would, for a minute or two, talk about your article and how it came about.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for that introduction, and it's great to be here. I'm honoured to accept the award from such leaders of the field as yourselves. So thank you very much, everybody. And I may be stretching the terms of young scholar, but definitely new, at least. So the research really came about when I was doing my PhD, which I received in early 2020 and sort of submitted in 2019. I was at Cardiff University, and I was looking at sort of rural crime, wildlife crime, food enterprise crime, widely sort of conceived. And as you just so well put it, Joseph, that prior to this, when I was doing the literature reviews, really it did seem that either that there was a sort of major gap in the literature, or a lot of the work was really putting things in those sort of very binary terms, or using relatively simplistic theorization of a problem that, as I was lucky enough to get deeper and deeper into it in the rural West Country of the UK, I found out to be a lot more complexities, and I was lucky to be in the right place at the right time, that everyone that I contacted that was happy to speak to me, crime control agents, park rangers, League Against Cruel Sports, trading standards, environmental health, various wildlife crime officers, rural crime police officers, who I'm all still very much in contact now, and who will contribute to my modules in my lecturing. So I'm really lucky in that respect. And they all just really wanted to tell their stories. And so I was lucky enough to sit down with them and talk to them repeatedly over a number of years, go to their offices, have lunch with them, and just ultimately socialize with them. After really cold contacting them on just doing media searches, contacting their secretaries or contacting their offices, cold calling almost, and all of them were warm and happy enough to speak to me. And really I built the research and the outputs and the theorization of the problem up from there, and been lucky enough to publish a number of articles around that research. And the particular one that we're talking about, I found very interesting, that a number of the key respondents were discussing how particular rural policies and environmental legislation, such as in the UK, the controversial badger cull policy, was enabling compromised rural specialists such as gamekeepers, some farm workers, other countryside managers and stewards of the land, to use that official certification of being an official badger cull licensee shooter. So if they were found to be doing other illicit activities, such as the illegal taking or poaching of deer, at 3 a.m. up on the moors, they could simply flash their certificate and say, no, I'm a specialist, I'm here, I'm a badger cull shooter. So that was relatively interesting, but I didn't necessarily find that startling. What I did find out of the badger cull legislation was that ultimately a lot of the shooters were so corrupted, they were just simply using it as a way of income generation or for profit. For instance, one of the badger cull shooters were found later to have a freezer full of badger carcasses that he was then bringing out during the badger cull to get paid for shooting those badgers. And he was shooting those badgers out of the official cull season. He was shooting them all year round, storing them up on his property, to then when it came to the official time to be able to receive payment per badger, for payment per kill, he was just getting all these badgers out of his freezer and saying, here's one I prepared earlier if you like. The other piece of rural legislation was the Hunting Act 2005, which in the UK ultimately prevents fox hunting or the pursuit of mammals with hounds. And obviously that's a very hard-won piece of legislation that environmentalists and naturalists are proud of. My research found that a lot of landowners in the area that I was doing research were ultimately arguing that since that legislation had been brought in, their land was being overrun with deer, which was decimating their crops, destroying their hedges and trees and other things that are of note for rural industry and on farms and land and estates and things. Whereas prior to the legislation of the Hunting Act being brought in, some of the hunts were legally dispatching the red deer in the West Country, of which in the West Country I did my research, red deer is most abundant. It's also in the Scottish Highlands, as you know, but it tends to be the most abundant in the West Country because we have the nicer climate and the better pastures for the deer to graze on. Since the Hunting Act, those hunts are now unable to legally hunt, even though we know that a lot of them are illegally doing and illicitly doing it, and the police are turning a blind eye. Those legal hunts aren't doing it as often. This has led to a proliferation of the deer, huge more volumes of deer. So now we find the landowners are inviting what I'm referring to as illegal takers of deer, people who are shooting deer out of season with incorrect caliber firearms at night. All of these things are illegal under deer shooting laws in the UK. I don't refer to it as poaching because those landowners are inviting these people onto their land to ultimately dispatch the deer because they're now being overrun with deer since the Hunting Act legislation. I'm in no way arguing that the Hunting Act is problematic and should be repealed. I'm saying it needs to actually be bolstered and properly regulated even more so.
Yeah, what I think your research shows is we do live in systems. And so one part of the system changes, other parts of the system change too. And often the unintended consequences are the most interesting things to study from a criminological point of view. You did a paper on intimate partner violence, and if you would please briefly describe your paper.
Yeah, absolutely.
By the way, this is the winner of the Research Student Award, one of two. Freya, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you so much for the award. It's really an honor. I know I did present to a couple of people here, I think at a meeting last year about the paper, so I apologize if I repeat myself. So my paper looked at intimate partner femicide, and it was a project that I did for my PhD. So I examined 100 cases of intimate partner femicide across Queensland in Australia. And a really interesting finding that emerged was that there were more femicides that occurred in rural areas, so less populated areas. And Queensland does have a large rural space. So we kind of have some small cities, pretty much two kind of major cities, and then the rest of Queensland is very much, regional and remote. So it was kind of interesting to come across this finding that more femicides occurred in these rural spaces, but that they differed in other ways. So this is what I wrote the paper about, was that, when we compare intimate partner femicides from major cities to rural, we kind of see some differing characteristics of the crime, particularly in barriers for the victims. So the fact that they were more likely to be in a current relationship with the offender at the time was quite interesting to me, because it kind of suggests that potentially there are physical barriers to separation, that the actual act of leaving a rural space, whether that be on a farm or in a small community, it suddenly becomes a lot harder to separate from your partner safely and access those services that would be able to provide resources during that time. So I thought that was really interesting, and obviously suggests that a lot more work needs to go into the services that are in these rural areas. Also the active concealment, which was something that I examined, in all of my cases. It was less common to conceal the crime in rural areas. And what that suggested to me was that potentially the actual environment that rural spaces offer is a natural way to conceal crimes. Whether it was used intentionally or unintentionally is hard to say, without speaking to, every offender, but, potentially there is actually less of a requirement to conceal a crime or a femicide in these spaces, because you can simply let the environment do it for you. So I did think that was quite interesting, and I would really love to, do a national study to see if this trend continues across Australia. I think Queensland, while unique in some ways, there's certainly most Australian states have a largely, densely populated major cities, and then sparsely populated but large rural areas. So I think it would be really interesting to see if that trend continues.
Freya, I don't have it in front of me, so I need to ask you, where are you? What university?
I just finished my PhD at QUT, and now I work for ANROSE, which is a national organization for women's safety.
Okay, thank you very much. We also have a second winner in this category, and that's Jessica Wooley, who did, related research. It's on digital coercive control and its rural characteristics. So, Jess, would you give us a little background on you, and then also on what you did for your particular paper?
Sure thing. Thank you very much for the award as well, and congratulations, Freya. It's great to see that you're on here as well. So a bit of background on me. I am currently a PhD candidate at Deakin University, and I'm based in Melbourne. So a little bit early for me this morning, not going to lie. So my paper was based on my honours research, which was completed last year. So my honours research looked at help seeking within the context of digital coercive control. So I wanted to take an urban and a non-urban focus. So I interviewed 9 practitioners across both because of the constraints of the honours thesis. But it was really interesting and fantastic to to interview people from across these different areas of Victoria in Australia. So one of the interesting findings in relation to non-urban participants was that they found that the victim survivors were rendered both invisible and visible, within the sense that it can be difficult to seek help because of how visible and how people know each other within the community. However, the sort of invisibility of being in a rural or remote location can really provide strong barriers to being able to escape an abusive relationship, and also escape the digital coercive control because of the increased surveillance that victim survivors may experience. But yeah, I can go, this is going to go into a journal article. Hopefully it's going to be submitted within the next couple of months. So if anybody's interested in reading my findings, you're more than welcome to follow me on Twitter or get in contact.
Now let's go to the ISSRC Policy Practice and Engagement Award. And again, we have two different winners. The first on the list is Paul Andell and John Pitts. And they are associate professors at University of Suffolk, New United Kingdom. Do we have anyone from there?
Yes, Joe.
Oh, there you are. Okay.
Hello, and I'd like to say thank you very much for the award. I'm happy to accept. Feel honoured to have the work recognised in the way it has been internationally, and with such an interesting division from the American Society. So thanks for that. John is an emeritus professor at Bedfordshire. He's a specialist in youth justice. I don't see him here this evening, but he's my partner in crime. We've worked together on gangs for maybe 13 years. And I guess very quickly, the story about child criminal exploitation and having this recognized in practice and policy, we managed to finally convince people that this was a real problem, and we weren't just making it up. And in fact, it kind of forms a new and emerging middle drugs market with the exploitation of children and vulnerable adults from the urban to the rural. And I guess the way that my entanglement, if you like, with rural criminology is formed is, as you say, from a practice background. So both me and John are from practice. We both have worked with young people. So when I was working in Brixton, and maybe people know Brixton, maybe people don't know Brixton as part of London, it's a bit like Harlem is to New York, really. And young people were disappearing who I was working with. I was working in a gang exit project, doing some work with young people, and they kept disappearing and then reappearing a few weeks later. And I'd ask them, well, where have you been? And this is, middle of South London. And they'd said, well, we've gone country. And I didn't understand what that meant. And actually, some of these young people were being exploited to carry Class A drugs to various rural parts of the UK. And it's estimated, it's seen as a national threat now. And it's been estimated that maybe 90% of the country is covered by this drug distribution method, exploiting young children. But in the early days, it was very difficult for us to have gangs recognized as an issue in the UK, let alone child criminal exploitation. So we've come a long way with this. And I guess from my migration from South London to rural East Anglia, which is where I live now. I live in a small city, Norwich, but I work down in Suffolk. These issues were popping up in Suffolk, whereby young people were disappearing from Suffolk and being found in London. So there was a kind of relational thing that was going on between the urban and the rural. And so I had to think about what was actually going on. And that's when I discovered what going country meant, when we came across all of these London young people in rural Ipswich and the rural young people popping up in Brixton in South London. So this whole thing about rural criminology being relational is something that kind of intrigues me. This kind of center periphery relations, and the ideas for me of some theoretical lead, but that just being a strategic entry point into deeper social relations. So there's difference and commonality, and how do we look at the commonality of our differences? So I don't know, I think work by Julian Gore, Vandenberg and so on kind of intrigues me. So we kind of theorized as we went along in an action research methodology, which was kind of a little bit theory-led and then revised as we moved along. And we were kind of fixing things along the way in terms of your applied with the action research model, and then revising theories. And we managed to restructure the community safety partnerships in Ipswich. They managed to get, on the back of our research, £3 million, which was good, to set up new services. So specialist gang services, really, exit services. And the work continues, really. So that's the top and bottom of it. Praxis, I suppose you might call it.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that some of what you are witnessing and have written up is similar to a lot of the literature on human trafficking and international illegal trafficking of just about everything. Recently at the criminology meetings, I had someone ask me, well, why do you have a rural division? I mean, tell me what rural crime is. And I said, well, larceny, burglary, homicide, but those are urban. I said, no, they're rural. Tell me why you need an urban criminology now. And the issue is, this is after a few drinks, by the way. And the issue is that a lot of crime crosses borders in various ways, including rural and urban. So it's great stuff. We need to recognize that ecology where we don't have a fuller understanding of what crime is. The next award is from our friends at Fort Hays, Kansas. And Ziwi, I never pronounced your name correctly. My apologies for that. Ziwi Chi, or Chi?
Chi, C-H-I,
Chi.
like a Chi, like a Kung Fu Panda, the Chi master. That's a, yeah.
And the other one is very easy if you have a Midwest U.S. background, April Terry. And both of you have been working on, and you're two of what I would consider a larger group with Morgan Steele and one other person that are rural focused. In fact, you may have the largest rural focused group of faculty anywhere in the world. And yours was on empowering victims of gender-based violence. So if you would, please describe that a little bit for us.
As you said, it's correct. It's a collaborative work. And then I think I'm going to just introduce a little bit more about the background of the center, because center is very young. And I will refer to Dr. April Terry, talk about some of the research initiatives, workshops, and how we tap into practice engagement in the community. First of all, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. My name is Ziwei Chi. Please feel free to refer to me as Z. I am originally from China, but I'm currently now residing in Kansas, United States, Hays, Kansas, at Fort Hays State University. We are a comprehensive teaching institution. However, because we reside in this rural areas, I think a lot of times the crimes, the experiences, situations that is very unique to rural Kansas that we really want to tackle. So that is why I think it's great to even hear that we have a large group of faculty member and students working on this type of research. So the entire name for the center is called Center for Empowering Victims of Gender-Based Violence. I think the core piece is the empowerment and understanding the intersectionality of gender-based violence and rurality. And our center established in March 2020. And if we think about that, it's really just the start of the pandemic. So over the past 2 years, we really did a lot of the research and the virtual workshops that I believe Dr. Terry can comment a little bit more, because she is the driving force for some of the topics as well. But anyways, in past 2 years, we have done a lot of the roundtable research, really trying to bring in research into the community and to see how can we tackle the issue of gender-based violence, especially during the pandemic, considering it's a shadow pandemic, considering the rural area has added barriers in terms of access to services, report to the police, or even looking for transportation, get out from the situation. In this short time frame, we have done a lot, as a matter of fact, and then we have been recognized for this award by an international society. And also in 2021, we are actually recognized by the National Council of Court in the United States. They recognize our innovative approach to figure out how can we address the empowerment issues with community work. So overall, there are a lot of the good things happening, and then I am just really happy to work with all of faculty members as one of the co-founders, and also our student researchers to continuing making our impact to the community. And now I will refer to Dr. April Terry to talk a little bit more about our research, our policy, and some other exciting things going on.
I actually think Zoe probably covered it pretty well, but as she mentioned, we are mostly at the stages of sort of trying to make connections and establishments and do collaborative work with different agencies. Zoe's done her own work across Kansas with our Sexual Assault and Domestic Violence Coalition. We've partnered with some of the international people here in this room to host some virtual roundtables. We have a book that will be coming out through the Rule series with Bristol. Zoe, correct me if I'm wrong, March of next year, or Alistair will probably know better than I would. But so
it's either March or May, I can't remember. Yeah, one of those.
You have too many books on the brain. You may not know the date, but I think March of 23. And then we're sort of branching out into different topics. We do have a lot of student involvement, which I think is great. Starting really right now, Zoe and I also have a project where we would like to assess, more of an assessment is what I would say, I guess, of trauma-informed courts throughout Kansas, because I'm also at Fort Hays State University. As most people in here probably can imagine, we assume we'll find that very little is being done for victims going through the court process, but it's really more of an assessment. So maybe we can provide them with some best practices, or really anything more than likely what we'll find that people are doing throughout the court system. So that's sort of our current large, I would say our bigger project. It'll be quite an undertaking, but we have a good relationship with our Department of Corrections and our Office of Judicial Administration here. And then we have other community partners who are actually fairly willing, I think, to come along for the ride to help us sort of find better ways of working with people, working with survivors. And so hopefully we'll have some preliminary information to share maybe next year at some point.